welcome everybody to another developer interview here on Game Wisdom for our Perceptive Podcast series. I am Josh Beiser, and joining me tonight, he is the co-founder of the studio Daylight Basement Studio, who just released their first game, or I believe one of their first games, onto early access, Rightfully Beary Arms, an action roguelite, and we're going to be discussing it, and I'm sure a lot of rogue nature tonight. So please welcome to the cast, Christopher. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on the show. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yep. Thank you again for wanting to come on and all that. As I always say, I'm always happy to talk with new developers, and if you are a developer watching this and would like to come on and promote your own game or talk game dev, I'm always happy to have you. But as I said, you just released Rightfully Beary Arms onto early access, and definitely congratulations on that. And we are sure going to be talking a whole lot about that in the coming minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. So, for anyone tuning in either live or recorded, if you do have any questions or any comments for Christopher, please feel free to type them into chat. So, since this is your first time on, Christopher, could you talk a little bit about who you are and what is your background, and then we'll talk more about what Rightfully Beary Arms is.
Yeah. So I'm Chris Bischke, co-founder of Daylight Basement Studio. Background is in software engineering. I've been a software engineer for about past 10 years or so. And I've always done kind of hobby game design, game development on the side. And at one of my engineering ventures, I met up with Mike Moody, my development partner, and we shared in how we've always done sort of these hobby development, game development projects, and we've never really finished anything. And so this was kind of our first stab at going, bolts to nuts, beginning to end, with an actual game dev project. So that's what Rightfully Beary Arms is.
Great, and definitely congratulations on finishing your first project.
Really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. It's in a lot of ways, it's just the start, right? Early access. We've very, very proud to be at this point, but we're launching into EA because we really, really want that community engagement and that player feedback to kind of tune things. So still decent amount to go, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. How long were the two of you working on Rightfully for?
RBA has been about 4 years. Different levels of involvement throughout those 4 years. At the start of it, and it's been a part-time venture for us, so we both have like full-time jobs. And at the start of it, it was pretty light involvement. Mike and I both had like obligations outside of work itself and kind of doing it. And then it wasn't until maybe about 2 years ago we got way more serious into the development of it, and it's kind of turned into a second full-time job at this point. But yeah.
And for people watching us right now, what is kind of like the elevator pitch for Rightfully Beary Arms?
It's an action shoot 'em up roguelite. We have I would say like a similar, and we get compared a lot, our gun game, to like Enter the Gungeon. However, we like put a lot more emphasis on planning and meta progression inside of the bullet hell shooter world. So there's choices for the players to choose which dungeons they want to crawl, see which resources they can potentially get out of those dungeons, and then even like choose how the enemy gets more difficult within runs. So we're trying to shift more choice over to the player and less randomness that you can't control. So.
Mm-hmm. And for people watching, you know that I've certainly played a few roguelikes. I mean, one of my design books was on roguelike design as well.
I saw that.
And yeah, it's definitely a genre that I am certainly versed in. So, what made you two decide to do like a action roguelike as like your first big game?
Yeah, it's such a loaded question because I feel like there's so much that went into choosing that. I think like reflecting on it, there's a lot of qualities within roguelikes that, one, like as I've been growing up as a gamer, I've been just enjoying being able to sit down and just play 25 to 40 minutes of something and then kind of, turn it off and then come back an hour later and pick it up again and not have to remember the story or anything like that. Just play through it. With the engineering background that Mike and I have, I think roguelites give a really great. They're a great development genre for us to like get player feedback, which is like really important from and some a lot of skills that we have from our software engineering background to get players involved early on, hear their feedback, and it doesn't spoil anything if players play it because it's designed to play it over and over again. So getting that community involvement's been super important to us. But yeah, I think those are like kind of like the big reasons. But there's definitely others that go into it. But yeah.
And roguelike design definitely has grown a lot in the past like 10 years, especially with the more like action roguelike focus. Of course, you mentioned Enter the Gungeon earlier, and that one is certainly one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's really good. I've been recently playing Tape to Tape, which has been a ton of fun, and I feel like a really good lens on the roguelike genre itself. So, but yeah.
Oh yeah, the hockey one. I haven't had a chance to play that one, but I've seen people talk about it.
I grew up playing like those like really old like NHL like those pixel ones, the really old ones, and so being able to play Tape to Tape has been a bit nostalgic, and then also like hey, it's like this really awesome modern spin on kind of these like sports games that I think usually get boring, but this one's been a lot of fun. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, I've been playing a lot more like action roguelikes. I just got the game to check out Spiritfall, and trying out a Remnant 2, which is more of a Souls-like than a roguelike. But it is another case where we're seeing more games using procedural generation. And one question that I always like to ask like developers who are working in like roguelike and roguelite design is, how was it like wrapping your head around proc gen? Building it with Rightfully Beary Arms.
I think at first when we were designing it, we went really hard to the randomness of the procedural part, and the levels felt lifeless. It felt kind of boring. The dungeons were often just like these really small rooms, just connected by these like really long hallways, and the randomness of the enemies felt like there was these moments of fun, but a lot of these moments of just like you knew what was coming. And then we kind of shifted to more of like we hand design the rooms, maybe have some influence over how dungeons are laid out slightly, some bias that we put into the system, but the rest of the stuff is more random, and so that kind of has been at least for us a good balance between trying to craft these these rooms that have some design elements with players in mind, and then the procedural part that these rooms get connected kind of randomly together, maybe some conditional statements in there for if this room generates, then this one comes in after it, but for the most part that generation kind of keeps it fresh each time you do a run. But yeah,
and like what you described there, I think it does feel like a common issue that I see in a lot of action roguelikes, that idea of how do we actually make each run feel varied? Because it is like, I've played so many roguelikes and roguelites and so on where the actual run doesn't necessarily like matter to the gameplay. Like the rooms are just there to facilitate, here's 3 enemies to fight, here's a spike trap to avoid, and it just kind of all gets blurred together at some points in these games.
We've tried to address that with like adding these other systems on top of it that can influence the player's choice within the run. So we have like a permanent upgrade system that allows persistence and feels like the player's progressing, kind of like the like Hades or Dead Cells, where you can like unlock things and kind of slowly build your character up. But we did this like in-run only upgrade system, which kind of drastically changes the world and systems in the player's favor, which can like alter how you think about entering the room or alter how you engage enemies, to your benefit. And the rooms aren't just these husks that just facilitate, like just like what you said, where they just kind of going through the motions till you get to an overpowered part of the game, and then you just go cruise control. Trying to put a little bit more emphasis on the thought and the strategy part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And with like the general like action side of things, obviously with the Enter the Gungeon comparison, if you look at the screenshots, it does, or GIFs, it does compare very heavily to that. I guess while you were studying, I'm sure with that comparison, you guys have studied Enter the Gungeon. What aspects, like, was there anything that you wanted to do specifically, like, differently with the general gunplay or general action to help it stand out from Gungeon?
Yeah, actually, like, I totally get it. We get compared a lot to Gungeon. I feel like it was probably more Nuclear Throne that the gameplay came from. It was our gameplay, it feels a little bit faster than Gungeon. Like, don't get me wrong, love Gungeon. There's a lot to love about Gungeon. But I feel like we actually favor a little bit more to like a Nuclear Throne style game in terms of gunplay. But yeah, I think in terms of like the actual action part, we tried to keep things faster pace. The rooms themselves we designed to be a little bit more claustrophobic feeling. Like enemies kind of spawn really close to you. The rooms themselves generally are smaller. We have some bigger ones, and that's just like the idea is like kind of like get the action going fast, and have the player think about their moves as enemies are spawning in, and like try to execute it. And we try to enable that also with like active abilities too, which other bullet hells tend to avoid, I feel like. But yeah.
And we were mentioning about being able to kind of like alter and tweak each run. That was definitely something that we've seen a few action roguelikes, even stuff like deck builders have done to like add like persistent difficulty and stuff like that. So could you go into a little bit more detail about like how you can make the game like easier or harder as you're playing through it?
Yeah. So we have a system called the Calamity system, actually like heavily inspired by I don't know if you played it's like an RPG storytelling game called Wildermyth. They have a like this dynamic system that like you choose like a new enemy that gets entered into the world, or exactly how like the world gets harder around you. And as I was playing that, I was like, wow, this like feels like it would be perfect for like a roguelite or roguelite runs. So as you beat bosses and you're progressing through the world, we have a similar system where you choose how the enemy or the systems in the world get more difficult, and we're trying to have that influence again player behavior of like how they're going to approach their run. Maybe there's no stores in your next galaxy. Like we have a galaxy is like a set of dungeons and then a boss, and so you have to like beat 5 bosses to basically get to the end of the game right now in the early access. So yeah, do you want to have like no stores in your next set of dungeons? Do you want to have lose all your cash, things like that the players can kind of make that calculated decision. And then the opposing force to that is what a system I kind of referenced earlier called run times, and these are like only in run only upgrades that try to like balance that system, and again like try to influence how the player behaves and how they approach their run.
And what was kind of like the philosophy that you wanted to like focus on with the calamities and run times? Because we've seen games that can go like either like very late, like enemy does 2 points more damage, or there are some games where it can just turn into like in Hades. Like if anyone who remembers the Pack of Punishment, it's just like let's just turn on every single difficult thing and just see how nasty the game gets.
Quick tangent, which I think someone just beat, right?
I know.
64, which is I watched that run. I was like, oh my god, how
I
could
need to
that?
watch that after we're done
Yeah,
with this.
like it's like 20-25 minutes or something like that, and I think they had like a minute left to beat it or 2 minutes left to beat it. Basically, it was crazy. But
Hmm.
anyway, um, yeah, I think where we are now is a little bit. It's not quite where I want it to be in early access. So I think we're kind of along the lines of it just kind of slightly altering certain systems and mechanics. I do want to like gradually get to like having a bit more drastic changes within the calamity systems or those in run only upgrades, because I again like I do want players to have to think about like how they are approaching rooms. And like you said, I don't want them to just like go through the motions. They just like go through a room and like they already know how to beat it, and like um they've done it before, 100, this is their 100th run, and they're just trying to go through the motions to get to that point where they're like overpowered. So just a little bit more thought we want to get into, but and we have some ideas how to do that, but mainly just taking player feedback right now on before we implement that stuff. So
Hmm. And with the kind of like difficulty of the calamities, how are you approaching how hard you want to make some of these options? Because
yeah,
again, it's a very fine line to walk between saying, enemies do more damage versus your entire run is now like kneecap. Like we just turn
yeah.
off your ability to use a gun or something like that.
I will say that like so I love Isaac, love Binding of Isaac, but I hate the part of Isaac where like you feel like you're having a good run, and then all of a sudden you get a couple rolls, and then it's exactly what you said. It's like kneecapped, and like that's it. So trying to avoid that with these systems that we've implemented, but we're probably biased on we've had some reviews of our early access, and the term punishing comes up quite a bit. So I think we've kind of favored or heavily on it being a little bit too difficult. So I think we do need to kind of work on not necessarily toning it back, but like thinking about different ways that the player can express it express their builds or express their play style to make the game seem easier, or learn different mechanics faster, things like that. um,
Mhm. Yeah, and like with the difficulty side of things, that's always another very interesting point we talk about roguelikes, and especially about a roguelite. Because we
yeah,
haven't yet discussed like how like the meta progression works just yet, and we'll come to
yeah,
that one probably in the next few minutes. But
sure,
with like the difficulty of the game, I guess like as you said, like you've name dropped a lot of, like the big name ones of action roguelikes or the past decade. In terms of difficulty of Rightfully Beary Arms, like what was kind of like the approach you guys wanted to do, and like did you want this to be more on like a higher side, or do you want to make it maybe like a core or a casual roguelite?
I think more of a casual, and it's been interesting because I think people that kind of jump into the game blind have a bit of a they get right now it seems like they get kind of turned off by the difficulty curve. But there's been players that like will watch stream it, or we've been on live streams with some people who usually don't play this sort of genre, and they've like explicitly been like, yeah, we don't really play that, and we coach them through it, and then like it clicks for them, and it's like really cool how to do that. So I think like we have a job to do of like figuring out how to teach that stuff naturally in the game, and kind of lower that barrier of entry. We have the systems in place. I believe we have the systems and the levers in place. It's just about tuning it right now. Like I said, the journalists have like said it punishing, which is like I I don't mind that. Like I don't mind having a difficult game right now, because like I said, I think we do have the ways and the mechanics to kind of tone it back right now. But yeah,
And when I check this game out, for those of you guys, for everyone watching this live, we'll probably be playing this for next Wednesday night's indie stream. Just to give you the heads up, there's a good chance I may accidentally break the game, because it seems like every time I play a new roguelike or roguelite, on stream, I will break it in some way, shape, or form. So
I love that.
we shall see just how far I can get in it.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
And that is, again, like that very interesting point about roguelike design, just in general. That there are people who will play a game like this, or a game like Isaac or Gungeon, they'll be like, be it like second try, starting weapon, no hit run. Can you make the game harder for me? Can we have like a random spikes that will just pop up and hit you?
Yeah.
And then you'll have, again, like that party audience who they will need every single roguelite upgrade and every single persistent upgrade just to kind of break even. And
Yeah.
it's a tough line to walk as a designer because, as we said, like right now, people are describing the game as being punishing and hardcore. That will kind of perk up the ears of a very specific audience, but it's also going to reject, people who are looking for more of a casual or a light game. And like the advantage of like roguelite design and having these kinds of like meta progression and persistent difficulties is that it lets the player kind of, again, pick their poison. But it's that tough side, as you just said, of how do you let the player know that our game is going to be on the easier side. You have all these tools to make it easier. But, if you really want to hurt yourself or if you really want to sweat, here's this entire list of like masochistic choices.
Yeah. I think the perfect example for our game of like exactly what you said was we were before launching into EA, we had a Next Fest demo out. And the Next Fest was like a very short snapshot of like the current version of the game. We had players who could beat it in like 20 to 30 minutes, and then we had players who took like over 4 hours to beat it. And it was like very like, yeah, it's like, all right, well, how do we address this? I'm not quite sure yet. So, and maybe you want to leave that in the game. I don't know. It's still to be decided. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, a question came in from Al, and they were asking, can you describe the reasons for the weapons and characters you choose?
Yeah, so the weapons themselves are like derived from maybe I'll start with the characters. The characters are more like from a kid's imagination. Like Barry is a teddy bear in real life of this kid, and then the world around him is the teddy bear is kind of this kid going through different like self concepts and imaginations and things like that. So when I was a kid, I heavily like I would get involved into like some media somewhere or like a video game, and I would like dream about it, and I may like cross stream with like different shows or things like that. So we're trying to tap into that like nerdy nostalgia. And so like the weapons then represent like things that how kids interpret things, that we go from very, very silly to very punny and things like that. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I forgot to say that Al has your last name, so I think he may be related there.
Yeah, I think so. I have a feeling.
And that actually takes me to this next question. In terms of like the aesthetic of the game, you just kind of described like that kind of dreamlight style.
Yeah.
Was this something that was like there like right at the beginning when you first started coming with the game, or did it take you some time to kind of settle on the general like aesthetics and theme for Barry?
The aesthetics actually kind of landed pretty early on, at least like we chose a pretty limited color palette that kind of gives this like uncanny valley sort of look to it. And then even the dream setting and the imagination setting, we had a lot of ideas that were kind of thrown around early on. It also just like allows us to kind of explore a lot of different narrative stuff, which, for those interested, we don't really go into narrative at all in early access, and that's by design right now. We don't want to kind of spoil that. Back to my earlier point, like we're using early access to kind of hone in on mechanics and different systems, but if we started doing storytelling elements, it kind of spoils it for the full experience. So that's something to look forward to in the 1.0 launch.
Mm-hmm. And I was looking at like the store page, and I was kind of reminded of another action roguelike that I played, Revita, Revita, that came out. I think this was like last year. It was another game
Okay.
that did the whole early access kind of push as well.
Okay.
And one of the, as you were just saying, like in terms of like building this game and also release on the early access, the challenge is how much you want to show, as well as getting feedback. And
Yeah.
with like what you've gotten so far, again, like for those of you watching this live, the game's been out for maybe like 4 or 5 days, maybe a little bit less than that, or a little bit more than that. And I guess like what has been like the general like plan? Like one of the challenges of early access is how much you want to upgrade or how much you want to keep putting out new updates versus just, going, head down coding and adding stuff like that. What
Yeah.
has been like your studio's approach to like how you want to use early access for Barry?
Yeah. So there's like easy answers, and then there's very very difficult ones. The easy ones are like bug fixes, balance stuff. Like that's stuff where without a doubt we're pushing out in early access. On the other end of the spectrum, story narrative things we're not going to touch at all. Maybe sneak one or two or things in, but we're planning on doing that for 1.0 release. And then in terms of like actual content, like maybe like levels, themes like that, it comes down to like a discussion between like Mike and I, the other dev on the project, of again like, is this too much to show right now? Is this something that we feel comfortable enough in the feedback that we've gotten in the community that like if we just unveil this on 1.0, like people aren't going to hate it? So that a lot of that is like weapon content, maybe like those upgrade systems. You have a good feeling on based on the feedback from the community that we can reserve this right now and hold on to it until 1.0 launch. There's other stuff though that is like if it's a bit more experimental and we need that feedback, like yeah, we're gonna definitely release it. And That's kind of always been our philosophy. Again, like with my engineering background, it's like you build software and you really want to get the customer's feedback instantly. A lot of modern engineering techniques are around that. And so that's something that we really want to tap into because we have a lot of skill sets around that.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about kind of like the action and like the feel of Barry, I wanted to ask you about how you set up or how do you approach like the general like movement and action in the game, because again we've name dropped a lot of very like action or very reflex driven roguelikes over this
Yeah,
cast, and it can be very hard, I think, for developers who are new to kind of understand the feel
sure.
of the character, and not only just that but being able to move, shoot, dodge, whatever your defensive options are.
Yeah.
So, could you talk a little bit about how you wanted to approach the general like gameplay of Barry, and like what did you kind of take away from the roguelikes and roguelites that you studied?
Yeah. So I guess like I'll tap back to Nuclear Throne. It felt Nuclear Throne, I think, feels fast. It also the levels, at least in even at the start, they're smaller, and kind of have that bit more of that claustrophobic, I feel like, design to them, where you can kind of jiggle peek a hallway and just kind of like just shoot different enemies in it. And so that's something that I think we really wanted, or at least I wanted to embody um, in the actual gameplay. We do have this like active ability system that we call proofs that tend to modify movement in some way. Not proofs, sorry. We call them gambits. And these active abilities that we call gambits actually like gamble some of your health away. So if you clear the room without taking damage, you while using a gambit, you get that health back. But it usually modifies your movement behavior in a very beneficial way. So one that slows down time. And like I said, we made the room sort of claustrophobic feeling and tried to have those complement and have gambits complement that. So like slowing down time, if you feel like you're getting overwhelmed, slow down time, figure out what you got to do. It also increases your attack damage as well during that time period. Um, and then overall, like the movement itself is kind of fast and snappy. We wanted to make sure that the players never felt like they're going too slow, I guess is another reason for it.
Hmm. In terms of like defense in Rightfully, what like defensive moves, or do you have any like ways of like adding like iframes or dodging attacks?
Yeah, so we have iframes right now, and then like the really cool thing is like with the calamity system, we have one calamity that you can decide to remove iframes if you really don't like it. It's always interesting to me when I watch certain players play. They'll select remove iframes, and I'm like, whoa. That to me, like I need them. I rely on them so much, but to them, they're just like, yeah, super easy choice for me. I'm gonna remove it. But it's like, yeah, I'm gonna give you that choice. Like I love giving players that choice. We have an active gambit that increases your speed, and then it also shrinks your hitbox, and you like shrink Barry down to a really tiny, which it was a lot of fun when there's like these like really tiny bullets coming around. All of a sudden, you just like lower your hitbox, and you're all of a sudden you're dodging things that you wouldn't be able to dodge before. So we're trying to think of more, and we have a lot more in mind, but those are kind of like the big ones right now. We also have the blanks from Enter the Gungeon, where you can clear all the bullets on screen. Again, it's at the cost of health, or that you're gambling your health, and you can get that back at the end of clearing a room. But those are, I think, the big ones right now. We do play into some weapons that can kind of like push enemies away. I call them like the panic weapons, where we have a finger gun that kind of you snap like that, and what it does is it pushes enemies away who are kind of closing in on you. So
Hmm. I gotta ask, do you have a calamity that like reverses controls?
oh my god, that's a great idea. I don't not no not right now. I don't know if it that would be like the the Hades like approach of like getting like a certain amount of heat. I feel like.
If you need any suggestions for like masochism difficulty, let me
Yeah,
know because
yeah,
I can give you a lot there. Before we, I do have a question that will kind of lead into talking about the persistent elements. But before we get to that, I
yeah.
want to get to this question from Chad Dark Ratbat. Asked, with regard to the game, will you be seeing a platform like Games Pass to grow more publicity in general? And do you have any other titles you would be looking to work on?
So, like, I think we're always open to different platforms. We just announced with the early access release that we will be coming to Xbox. So, I mean, we'll talk to Microsoft, see if we can get onto Game Pass. So, always open to that. Different platforms like Luna 2, and I forget all the other ones, but yeah, they're good ones to get on because alongside of getting people to play, you just get more publicity. So always looking for that. In terms of titles I'd be looking to work on, we always have ideas like on the back. Like we have a Google Doc of all these different things that we play a game and then we get inspired and write it down. And sometimes it seeps into RBA. Sometimes we reserve it for maybe working on in the future. But yeah, always looking to work on other titles.
Hmm. So to go back to the calamities for a second, and this will be again like our second talking about the persistence side. Are there any benefits to making the game harder? Like, do you get like more rewards? Do you get achievements, bragging rights, stuff like that?
Um, so definitely will be achievements right now for EA. We're reserving some of those achievements just in case we change the systems for the calamities, but that's definitely intended. Um, right now there isn't like a particular reward for it. I think like we're also in EA we're thinking about how to do like new game plus of like, all right, you kind of beat the core game, what happens after that? And so I think it will probably lean into exaggerating the current systems that we have, and that's something to look forward to. But nothing that like rewards you. The idea is like, you're progressing through the run and you're choosing how it gets difficult. So that's kind of your reward, I guess, in a way.
And I guess with the persistence side of the game, we haven't really touched on that. How what's kind of the implementation of how is the player going to grow more powerful permanently from run to run?
So we have I would say, I'll call it like the standard roguelite progressive element to it, where it's just like we call them proofs. They're little improvements to Beary that you can make, and you find the upgrade points we call inspiration within different dungeons, and so you spend inspiration points to improve yourself. That's things like adding hearts. It's things like increasing damage, maybe gaining half a heart at the end of a dungeon, just like small things that can like really benefit you over time. And so those things will persist from death to death. The one other permanent system that we have right now, which like so like certain bullet hell shooters, you go through and you find a weapon, and then maybe the next room all of a sudden you die and you're like, man, I really like that weapon. And so like something that like we wanted to encourage was, one, people to use weapons. So like another thing that happens, I at least I do in bullet hells, is like I'll save a weapon. It's like, all right, I gotta save this weapon because I don't know if there's going to be like a difficult boss soon that I need to like fight. And so then I end up not using it as much, even though it might be really really fun. So like what we did is anytime you collect a weapon, it actually persists from run to run. So you can use that to your advantage. And decide to like keep it for your next run, or use it all now. And then the second thing we did was we made ammo fairly easy to find and fairly cheap and affordable. Again, it's just like encourage using these weapons, so that you never get into that situation where you like just found something and then you like die in the next room and then you're like, man, I didn't really get to use it, or I didn't get to learn how to use it. That's like the other thing too, is like sometimes you pick up a weapon, you don't quite understand the mechanics of it, and then you die. You're like, well, I'm not going to do that again because that I was just taught that like I can't take that risk anymore if I have to use weapons that I like know how to use, basically.
Mhm.
And so weapons themselves have upgrades though that you can get within the run, and those upgrades clear after death, so you do lose them. So you can experiment with certain upgrades if you want, certain builds, but the idea is that weapons persist along with those other proofs.
Mm-hmm. And with the kind of persistent elements, one of the challenges that I've seen from roguelites is how much of those elements are actually required to win. Because I've seen in a lot of the ones I play that I've ran into problems with, it feels like the first 5 to 10 runs, you're just not possible to win. Like you literally don't have the stats or any necessary skills to actually get through a boss fight. And then, of course, you hit that one point, then the game just breaks open for you.
Sure.
With the start of playing the game, is it possible or feasible to beat the game on your very first run, or are some of these upgrades almost a necessity?
I think it's likely to beat the first boss on your first run, which beating your first boss, you'll get like some of those permanent persistent upgrades, which may help. But I think it's unlikely to beat the game right now on your first run.
Dark in the chat, I thought about having rare community achievements in the game. I think one thing that a suggestion for me about the achievements, again, I think tying it the calamities to achievements could be a fun thing. Even having special combinations, if you do it with this, this, and this, you get, I don't know, though, you really want to hurt yourself achievement. You want to turn on no iframe, reverse controls, maybe screen flickering. I'm sure someone will want to do that one.
I love it. Yeah, the masochist or achievement.
And I guess with the persistent elements, you mentioned a few minutes ago that right now you're kind of keeping with the industry staples, so more health, more damage, stuff like that. Do you have any ideas for any unique persistent upgrades for Beary?
the persistent side is more difficult to balance because you don't want it to be like all of a sudden you just have one upgrade and then all of a sudden the game is just like that's it. It's easier for you. So what we've been trying to do is lean more onto having those crazy ideas and upgrades inside the what we call runtimes, that in run only upgrade system. Because like sometimes we implement an upgrade and it's a lot of fun, but it kind of breaks the game in favor of the player. And it's like, well, we don't really want to nerf it. We really don't want to remove it. So what do we do with it? And that's kind of why we came up with the runtime upgrade system, is that like we could just move it to this like it's a random chance during your run. You kind of have to farm it and kind of put it behind a barrier. But if you reach that barrier, then congrats, you got this cool, fun upgrade that you can kind of break the game with. And so the persistent side though is it's a bit more difficult to balance on that, and it's been more of like that incremental change stuff.
Mm-hmm. And like with that kind of persistent size, you just said like you want to avoid that idea that
Yeah.
I hit this one upgrade and now the game is over. And the idea of like turning like the in-run upgrades, like making them like very weird or very polarizing, I think that is definitely a wise way to go. Because you mentioned, of course, like Biome Isaac earlier.
Yeah.
And like one of the issues I think Biome Isaac had, I don't know if I'll get the fans will jump on me for saying it, is that it does hit that point where once you know what you're doing, the run is kind of over in some of these games.
Yeah.
Like I know, okay, I need to take this, and this, and my run is immediately over. I beat the game. It's these are the best items. And I wanted to ask you about kind of, I guess, like the in-run upgrade philosophy. And what I mean by that is, how powerful do you want the player to get over the course of a run? And the reason that I put it like that is that we've seen kind of two different philosophies. There are some designers who they will limit, you can only have, let's say, a double shot, or you can only go 2 dashes at a time, even if there's like multiple powers. And then, of course, we have, again, when I interviewed Emmett McMillan, his whole philosophy was, I don't give a you-know-what. If you want 15 double shots all attached and, bouncy, exploding, split, poison, fire, bullets going off, who am I to stop you? And of course, that works when it's a roguelike where you're resetting at 0 each time. Yeah. But with a Beary, like, how far do you want, I guess, like, the craziness of the procedural generation to, like, be a factor?
I'll say that Mike and I are not afraid of if an idea comes in and it's off, it's wild, it's like, yeah, put it in the runtimes. Like, if it's fun, like, we're not against it. And like you said, like the roguelite nature of it is like you die and then like you might not roll it again. Like that's kind of the like that's okay, that's fine. Because if like the player's having fun, if we found it fun, like I'm pretty happy with that. But yeah, we're definitely not afraid to have something that's like a bit crazy in the run times. I'd say currently we're actually not super where I want us to be with the run times, where they're not too crazy, but we have a lot of ideas of kind of how to implement that right now. But
yeah, and I do like when we see like that like level of strangeness in some of these games, because as you just said, and as like fans and so on will know, when you're dealing with like random and proc gen, you're never guaranteed certain things, and sometimes you can have that like miracle run where in Biome Isaac I get, Epic Fetus, I get I always forget the name is completely lost on me. The one that you shoot like the giant like blood beam.
Yeah.
All the Biome Isaac fans are getting ready to type me angry comments for forgetting the name of that one. And it just turns a run into a cakewalk.
Yeah.
And actually, that takes me to another question I want to ask you about. In terms of replayability for Beary, how are you looking at making this game replayable? Because as we said, like in terms of balancing between like a core and a hardcore audience, there are
Yeah.
people who approach a roguelike as in I beat the game one time, well, I'm done, I'm never playing again,
Yeah.
versus again the people who will play this and go, okay, I'm going to do 95 more runs. I want to just crank up all the difficulties. I want to unlock every single achievement on your list.
Yeah.
So, how are you approaching that?
Yeah. So right now, I'd say that early access is kind of favored towards like thinking about it as that like one run completion right now. We are working on at during early access on like that new game plus and kind of what that player that specifically that player you're talking about. I want to like go through it 95 more times and try different builds and things like that. And so I again we have these systems in place and I think we can like really lean into them and make them more exaggerated, even more exaggerated for like new game plus and kind of reward that hardcore player that's going to keep going and play back to back runs and kind of have a new experience with it. And I think that's our current plan right now. So
And that also kind of like leads into that nature of a roguelite. That
yeah,
typically, when we look at the difference between a roguelite and a roguelike, is that the late usually has an endpoint. That once you hit that certain level or you see the end of the game, there's not really any other reason to keep playing it. I think the only one that I've played that has done something very much along those lines would be something like Rogue Legacy 2, where they have like the whole new game plus, and then it's like 14 or 15 layers of new game plus so you can
yeah,
add to the game.
yeah. I want to lean into being able to like have players be able to pick it up and keep going and try different builds and experiments on it, but satisfy those players that kind of just want to get to a certain point in the roguelite and be done with it. I guess like people with Hades, if they get once they get to the we were just talking about, but they get to the heat, maybe they put the controller down. I feel like there's a lot of players I know that kind of got to the heat system and then put it down, or there's players that get to the heat and then they're adding 64 of them and then uh, posting world records on that. But yeah, um, so that's kind of where we want to go with it.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that we didn't discuss yet, and also as a quick time check, we are about 47 minutes in. I would say, in terms of the questions that I have, unless there's any other topics that come up, maybe another 20 to 25 minutes. That works for you?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right. And for chat, if you do have any other questions for Chris, feel free to type them in and we'll get to them as they pop up. We haven't discussed enemy design in this game because that's another very important aspect of roguelikes and roguelites.
Yeah.
What kind of approach are you looking at in terms of, I guess, like difficulty of enemies, bullet patterns, attack patterns, stuff like that?
At a very early start, Mike and I decided on very simple, predictable enemies. Like you played them once, you know how they're going to behave. But the enemy variety is fairly high, so that when you begin to combine them, they begin to act and behave in different ways that maybe you didn't. Again, like how each individually one works, they kind of do one thing and they do that one thing in a predictable way. But when you bring them all together, then they kind of have these new interactions and new patterns and things like that. So, for instance, we have an enemy called we call it Battery Boy, and what he does is he slams his face on the ground and he sends out these like electrical kind of bullets out. And when they hit you, they slow you down for a little bit and they deal like half a heart of damage. But when they hit other enemies, they speed up their movement speed by like 20, 30, 40%. I forget, but it's significant. And so like again, like you learn that, and that Battery Boy just does that one thing. He doesn't really do much else. But being able to introduce enemy characters like that to the player and then have them add into like different other enemy concepts when they come in kind of gives that variety. Also makes it designing them a lot easier, I guess, from our point of view. Then I think there was a second question.
I
Sorry, I
guess in
forgot
terms
about
of
that.
like how hard you want to make the enemies and that kind of thing.
Yeah, like again, each individual enemy, it's like you should be able to understand it and take it on by itself. Yeah, I got a lot of actual inspiration from it's not a roguelike game. It was a competitive extraction game, Hunt Showdown. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but the NPCs and the enemies in that game just are very, very simple. And any single time you come across one, you can kill it just fine. Like no players are going to have any problems with it. But you get these certain combinations that happen, and then like it just gets so chaotic. And like you have seasoned players who've played 1,000 hours, and then you're watching them on Twitch just get completely run by these enemy NPCs, and it's a lot of fun. So.
Mm-hmm. And one thing we haven't talked about, but just to clarify for people watching who haven't played the game, do enemies give off any kind of like attack tells, or like are you given like an alert when a bullet's going to be shot, or like what a pattern is, or is it just up to you to kind of like figure that out based on watching the enemy?
Some of them are you have to figure out, which is something that we want to make updates to in early access to kind of always have a tell. Some of them will like we have an enemy called a peach bum, and it's literally a peach that kind of looks like a butt. And what it does is it runs at you and it gives off a kind of like a ding sound with lights flashing, and then it blows up, and it kind of shoots out a kind of a bullet pattern from that. So you kind of know that it's coming, and we have not as many bullet patterns as I think we want in the game right now, and that's another element that we're going to be adding over early access is having more interesting bullet patterns for some enemies. But yeah.
Mhm. In terms of like one thing we also haven't discussed yet, the length of a run. How long are you? How long is a run of Barry right now, and are you looking at expanding that in the future?
It's a bit of a loaded question again because you're thinking like you have to think of like so I kind of think of runs in two ways. Like there's kind of like the maxed out character or like the hardcore player. For them, the run I think ideally should be like 40 to 60 minutes. Ideally, if they're really good, it's like on the 40 side. If they're kind of slower, it's like towards the 60-minute side. Um, and then there's the time it takes in like a roguelite for like that more casual player to kind of build up to that point tends to be around, at least what we're seeing, around like 8 hours, if that makes sense. And so they kind of slowly build up to get all that meta progression maxed out, and then it ideally should take them like 40 minutes to complete it. But we've seen again more hardcore players kind of skip a decent amount of the meta progression and like kind of clear through things a lot faster, which I think is rewarding for them, or at least it seems like it is. So
Mm-hmm.
um, again, and I think I said it earlier, but yeah, we want to look to expand it, not necessarily the run itself, but maybe the variability and like new game plus, which I don't know if we're looking to expand the time per se, but maybe a bit more depth in the run with like new game plus and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in that respect, anything you can tease in terms of like a new game plus or additional ways of modifying the game.
I think yeah, short term it's going to be big on like performance and bug fixes, balancing things like that. And I think what's coming up right next is leaning into more of the systems that already exist and kind of experimenting more with that. So like be prepared maybe for a bit more ridiculous calamities, a bit more run times that are ridiculous. Weapon upgrades is something that we kind of want to lean into more. And I think that's kind of like the medium horizon for us. And then, 1.0 is we're planning more of a narrative and a bit more content on that. So.
All right. In terms of weapon design, we didn't really touch on this all that much. You mentioned earlier Nuclear Throne as being a major inspiration, and Nuclear Throne has a very wide assortment between melee, range, and then what was it, like the Gatling laser shotgun you could just use to like decimate things. What kind of like weapons are in a Beary right now in terms of, I guess, like their shot patterns or like what the player has access to?
Yeah, so we have like different tiers. We have like more common weapons, and then we have more rare weapons that you can find. Um, the like we have I think like more of like the staples like shotguns and machine guns, things like that. We have some more fun ones like a giant foam ball gun that kind of looks like a Nerf gun. And you're able to kind of like take things on the finger gun, things like that. The actual mechanics of the weapons, we really like to play with things like bullet speed, the fire rate itself, and then like things like pushback. And so pushback of Beary or even pushback of enemies is a lot of fun to play with that movement. We have like certain level design as well that we really want to lean into, where you can kind of push enemies off of like the the level itself, and then like that's how you kill them. So that those are like different ideas that we want to explore. um, and the idea is like as rarity increases, I think the more wacky and more of a learning curve the weapon has, that and that's kind of what we're going for. I want to like spoil too much, but for instance, we have a Catling gun. It's a cat that fires rainbow lasers, and when you first get it, it's like the spread is insane. It's like the spread is your entire screen, and it fires at a super high rate. But you can get like really, really good upgrades where you can kind of narrow the spread and reduce the pushback too. So like it also pushes Beary back like really, really far. So kind of leaning into things like that. I think like Deathloop does a really good job with the really high rarity weapons, where they kind of have their own like little learning curve to them, and that's like something that I want to try exploring with that.
How many weapons can you kind of like have like on at one time?
So I think right now we have about 20 weapons in the game, and in a save you can unlock them all, collect them all, and have them all accessed in your inventory. Like again, like it was pretty important for Mike and I to for players to use the weapons and use use the ammo. We didn't want anyone to feel like they had to like reserve anything per se, just because. So you can have all 20 weapons in in your inventory at one time if you wanted.
Mm-hmm. And I think just to clarify, I mean, like when you're actually like in the middle of a run, like can you swap between like two or three weapons at a time, or like what's like kind of like the in run like what you can hold while you're in the middle of the run?
So we have like a holster system
Mm-hmm.
which allows you to like quick swap, and initially you have two holster
Okay.
slots. With proves you can unlock 3 to 4 holster slots, but there's an inventory system behind that holster system, and you can swap out at any time for your holsters. At least that's the current design. It is something that we're watching, seeing if we can like play with it or tune with it. But in your inventory, you can have every single weapon in the game if you have it, and swap it into your holster. Usually between rooms is the ideal time to do that. But yeah.
All right. Let me see if there's anything else. In terms of boss designs, what's been kind of the approach of building like boss enemies? This is another thing that we see very wildly different approaches in terms of action roguelikes.
Usually it starts completely with a pun, and we just kind of go off of that and design the attacks, the theme around the pun. And So, like the current bosses, we have a bat tree. So it's literally a bat with tree wings, and then it spawns those battery boy minions. And so we have some achievement ideas for that. Spoiler, but a yellow jacket is a literal yellow jacket at the docks, like the actual like garment yellow jacket. But yeah, the boss designs again, they're fairly simple. Like I feel like we're maybe like leaning on, or we're biasing towards like Binding of Isaac style bosses, where we kind of have a pool of different bosses at different points in the game, and they're fairly straightforward. Like I feel like there's never a time you go into a Binding of Isaac boss and within the first 5 seconds you don't you figure out like exactly how the boss works, and you kind of just need to have the skill and the know-how how to beat them. So we're not trying to like complicate them in any ways too much, and that's yeah, just going forward with that design.
All right. Let me see. I think with that, I do have like a few like just general game dev questions for you to kind of begin to wrap things up. Before we do that, any other design points or topics you want to talk about with Barry that we missed?
I think we covered like quite a bit of the game, just like the persistent elements, the planning. I guess we didn't talk too much about the planning part. That's actually a big design part of Barry is you get a nav screen where you can choose the dungeons that you want to crawl,
Hmm.
and like there's like different nodes on a map that represent dungeons, and then you get insight into those dungeons of like what possible rewards you can get out of it. So things like cash, things like health, or weapons or weapon upgrades themselves, or inspiration points, which are like permanent upgrades. Um, and so having like players be able to choose their path through the dungeon system was pretty important because again, like you know, I it can be really frustrating where all of a sudden you come across a room in a roguelite, you lose most of your health, and you're like, all right, how can I influence the systems to like give me more health? And so we gave them, I feel like it's like kind of like Hades where you can kind of choose
Hmm.
to you usually have up to like what 3 doors to choose from and the rewards. Well, like ours is like you can kind of even see beyond the 3 doors. You can say, all right, if I jump here, I'm going to get a weapon, and then afterwards I'm going to get health from this planet. Or if things go well and I don't lose a ton of health, I can go to this planet and get inspiration, which is going to give you a permanent upgrade. So just like a little bit more choice for the player was important to us to give.
So it's kind of like set up like a node based system, like almost like a Slay the Spire style, where you can
Yeah,
see,
exactly.
do you want health, armor, blah blah blah. Do you see like yourself at like any kind of like special nodes? Like this is like where you can fight like a double boss, or this is where it gets like really strange, and if you win this, we'll give you like an extra rare weapon or something like that.
Um, so we have some of those systems actually in place, and they aren't obvious to the player right now. They're actually kind of hidden. But yeah, that's something that we want to explore more and show more off in early access for sure. I think like the special node that players can see right now are like store nodes. You can go to a store. There's guaranteed health there. It's pretty expensive, but you could also buy like weapons or upgrades, things like that.
All right. So with that, anything else regarding the design before we kind of like move into like our final set of questions?
I think that's about it. Yeah, covered quite a bit. So it was a lot of fun to talk about these different systems in such length and depth.
All right. So with that, I for kind of like my final set of questions for you, I'm gonna basically talk a little bit more about like the game dev or like kind of like what's going on that side with Barry. So I would say another 10 to 15 minutes if that works for you.
Yeah, it works.
All right. And for chat, for anyone who is watching us live, if you have any other questions for Chris, please get them in now because this will be kind of last call for questions. So to start things for this section, in terms of developing the game or in terms of the early access side, as we said, the time of this podcast, the game's been out for maybe about like a week. With, I guess, like the early access, like how long are you planning on staying in early access for?
The target is about a year. I think though the disclaimer to that is based on player feedback. We may push it or we may even shrink it. Again, like it's just so important to us to hear what the community thinks on different systems and different mechanics. But ultimately, that's our target right now is about a year from launch.
And as kind of like a game dev question, with this being both of your first kind of full project that you're working on, how are you finding working like in the early access space or like planning the game around being on early access?
I love it. It's very natural to me, and like again, one of the reasons why we want to get into the roguelite um, area is like being able to engage with community has been pretty great. We've built this like really small but like awesome community that they're already talking about like the meta of the game and different aspects of it, which is like just so awesome that this thing has been like kind of kept secret for a while, and then all of a sudden now you have like this like really small group of people that just are talking all different aspects of your game and strategizing. And so being able to peer into that before doing a 1.0 launch has been super beneficial. And like, yeah, that's something that it's been really important to us is that community engagement and feedback. So I've been loving early access. That's kind of how I naturally develop software before games, and so that's something that we look forward to.
In terms of updates to Beary, this is another challenge we've seen a lot of developers have when it comes to early access. Are you kind of planning like a specific, I guess, like timetable for new updates or new content, or how are you approaching that side?
The roadmap aspect has been like we still haven't even released, even though we have ideas and like timetables of like where we want things to go. We haven't necessarily released a roadmap yet because we don't want to communicate it. We want to be effective on how we communicate it because like again like I've said it before, but like Mike and I really count on community engagement and involvement, and that really does change the trajectory of like a lot of our development. So if we promise something, next month, but like we're getting feedback on something else that was completely off our radar, like we are totally fine with swapping priorities and things like that. So we're trying to figure out a way to like say, hey, these are the items that we want to tackle during early access, but they're going to be tackled within this time range and this time period, but like hey, that may change based on what you all say. And so that's kind of where we're at now. It's still to be determined, so yeah.
All right. See if there's anything else. I think we're about at the end here. You mentioned, of course, earlier that you're planning on putting this on Games Pass. Any other platforms you're particularly eyeing for Beary?
I mean, I think we're always open. We're keeping our options open. But yeah, for right now, Steam and Xbox in 2024. So
Oh, I guess here's a question for people watching us right now. If they pick up Beary in like this moment early access, like what is kind of considered, I guess, like done, or like what is like the current content of the game?
yeah, so there's 5 bosses right now, and three enemy factions that you'll have to crawl through. The enemy factions range from mech to insect to animal, and then the the final galaxy they go through is like all of them combined, and this is like this wonderful symphony of chaos. And so yeah, we've seen players play up to already like 10 plus hours, which has been pretty great. So I think there's a lot of deep content out there right now for early access, and so yeah, I think that's what you can expect.
All right. And I have to ask, you have anything to tease for like your first major update to the game for people watching?
So the immediate, which won't be too much of a tease, is we do have a big performance update coming on, which will help the deck out quite a bit. Right now, it kind of struggles on the deck. It's definitely playable. I play on it all the time, but the loading time on the deck is it's a bit long. So we've got a fix that we're testing right now, and it's looking pretty promising. And then immediately after that, I think the big things we're going to try to experiment and lean on are kind of those like in-run upgrades and those calamity systems, kind of having more experimentation with that. kind of make things a little bit more wacky and crazy, and then slowly kind of push out like weapons and enemies and bosses, things like that.
All right. I think with that, I am just about out of topics. We've hit a whole lot here. Anything else design-wise, roguelike-wise, anything like that we in touch on that you'd like to bring up?
Oh, I think this was a ton of fun. Had a great time.
All right. So with that, I think we'll wrap things up for the chat. It was great hanging out with you today, Chris, and definitely best of luck with Barry. As I said, I'll be looking forward to seeing just how much masochism you add with the calamities in the future.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
So before I let you go, do you have anything you would like to say to the fans watching? Any final points to take us out on?
Yeah, thank you so much. Especially, we had I know it's weird that we had a day one cult that all came into our Discord and bought the game, and I just like 4 years ago, I think Mike made this point. He's just like, I'll just be happy if we sold one game, and it was like, I don't know, we were aiming small, and we had a large amount of fans that helped us kind of celebrate the launch, and really appreciate you all. So it means a lot to us that I don't know, that you just even enjoy the art that we create. So really cool. So thank you.
All right, sounds good. So with that, Chris, I will let you go for today. It was a pleasure. Again, best of luck with the game in early access, and I'll be curious to see how it develops over the next year.
Thank you so much.
So, with that said, do you have any social media, any places people can find you or find the game? Let us know.
Yeah, the easiest way to get all of our social media is rbagame.com. It'll be a link to our Steam page, to our Twitter, all of our other socials, even our press kit, things like that.
All right. So, with that, we are going to wrap things up for this week's chat. For people watching us record, you'll find links to everything down below, so be sure to check that out. Again, Chris, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. And when the game is kind of closer to launch, I'll be happy to have you back on. We kind of discuss like how the game has grown over early access,
how chaotic it got, and would love to be back.
All right. So for everyone watching, we're going to end things here for tonight. If you're new to the YouTubing stuff people will tell you to do, check out our Discord and Patreon. There are links to all my stuff up there and down below. Do all that stuff about checking out For the Game Wisdom Game Jam. Check out my books, all this self-promo stuff that people will tell you. And if you are, once again, a developer working on an upcoming or recent release game and want to come on and talk about it, please reach out. Again, emails, DMs, all that are open. So, Chris, I will let you go for today. I hope you have a great weekend. And again, I'm curious, or I'll be happy to see how this game checks out. And make sure to watch it when I play it next week, and hopefully I won't break it too badly on stream.
Feel free to break it, that's fine.
Alright, so with that said, everyone, thank you for tuning in, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Have a great rest of your Friday, and a great weekend, and we will see you next time. Take care.